following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
People ask why my father is being inducted into the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame, and I talk about his 45 years at NBC TV in news and sports. I mention microwave relays and KU band satellites, and their eyes glaze over. So I say, maybe you've heard of the Heidi Bowl. In 1968, the Jets and Raiders had an epic football game in Oakland, trading the lead back and forth. It looked like the game would run long, but NBC was set to cut at 7 p.m. to a kids' show, Heidi. NBC executives called Broadcast Operations Control, my father's domain, to tell the technician on duty to stay with the game. But they couldn't get through because the switchboard was jammed with calls from worried viewers and it blew up. So Heidi aired at 7 on the dot. Everybody east of the Rocky Mountains saw a little Swiss girl with a bunch of goats, while the Raiders scored twice within 9 seconds for literally a last-minute win. A fast crawl across the screen gave the game's surprising final score, while Heidi's cousin struggled to her feet and then collapsed, a story of dueling crawls. It was my father's job to find out how the Heidi Bowl happened and to make sure it never happened again. What his team said basically was, the phone was busy, which was funny because his mother had been a switchboard operator. He was born in 1927 and raised in Litchfield, Connecticut, a small town around a village green of elm trees and memorials to the war dead. His father was a veteran of World War I. He just missed World War II, but the Army took him anyway. He was in the Army Signal Corps School for radio operators. At Boston's Emerson College, he learned radio and TV production, or maybe just radio, given the absence of TV monitors at Emerson's mock TV studio. He was an only child whose parents both died by the time he was 21, and it has always amazed me that a kid on his own finished college in June of 1951, got hired the last day of August at NBC TV, and never worked anywhere else for almost 50 years.
I started out in the guest relations staff as a page, giving out tickets to shows and ushering in programs and things. And it was just the start of television. 1951 is when it started to take off.
Broadcast television was being invented, and he was moving up the corporate ladder. In 1956, he was promoted to Supervisor of Operations for Wide Wide World, NBC's Sunday afternoon documentary series.
Our live cameras are on a corner lot of the St. Lawrence Seaway now, the docks of the Detroit Marine Terminals on the corner of River Rouge and the Detroit River.
The premiere episode featured reports from the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, the first live international North American telecast in TV history. He started assembling his team, a madman phalanx of business-suited engineers, and one co-worker he married, Barbara Owen of Denver, daughter of a radio broadcaster.
This has been an NBC television production.
It has never been easy for me to explain to people what my father did for a living. Mention television, sports, and news, and people think of Bob Costas or Tom Brokaw. But he was responsible for making sure everyone in the network could talk to everyone else, no matter what their cameras and mics were aimed at, and for making sure that those sounds and images ended up on TV screens across the country. Even President Eisenhower took note of his efforts. He was the operations manager of a crisis delivery service, with television bringing all the epic events of the 60s into your living room.
I think Mr. Nixon is an effective leader of his party. I hope he would grant me the same.
His career spanned a series of firsts. The first televised presidential debate,
All right,
off and the clock has started.
The 1962 Mercury space shot that launched the first American into space.
White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff has just announced that President Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is about 35 minutes ago.
And he was in New York, round the clock, when President Kennedy was shot. My brother Rob and I were beginning to learn that whenever something bad happened, even something good, our father would have to stay in the city and make sure it got on the air.
This is John Chancellor on the floor. I'm looking down at Edwin Newman in the middle of a huge bunch of security people.
He was in Chicago at the 1968 Democratic Convention when our country fell apart in real time, live and in color on national TV.
Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar ticket.
Moon landings, rocket ships, presidential trips, elections, assassinations, and a visit to China with Richard Nixon in 1972. The news of the 60s and 70s was a hard act to follow, but my father got a chance to cover what had become the world's biggest sporting event.
Which was the first Olympics that you...
The first one that I really had a role in was Moscow, and of course we never finished Moscow because President Carter pulled a boycott on the U.S. team going to the games.
For a long time, he was flying back and forth to Russia 15 times in 2 years, scouting, planning, negotiating with the Soviets. But then Russia invaded Afghanistan, and my father's Olympic dream didn't come true until the 1988 Summer Games in Seoul, when he was Vice President of Operations and Engineering for NBC's coverage, for the very first time in stereo, of 263 events in 27 sports. The broadcast center in Seoul was the third largest NBC broadcast facility after New York and Burbank, and one of the largest broadcast centers in the world. NBC President Bob Wright hailed the technical side of the event as flawless and carefully planned. Maybe he was remembering the Heidi Bowl. For his second grand finale, he moved up to a 26th floor corner office at 30 Rock, again as VP for the 1992 Summer Games in Barcelona, 161 hours of network coverage. He officially retired from NBC after 41 years, but nobody knew more about operations planning, so NBC hired him back for the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta. For 3 Olympics, the most complicated job in sports broadcasting, he commanded an army of the finest technical people in the business, bringing the games into millions of American homes and bringing home Emmys for the NBC team. And he made that happen with the narrowest possible margin of error.
You've lived a long time. What's your number one lesson you've learned?
You're only as good as your last station break.
What does that mean?
It means that you have to keep not making mistakes.
It seemed to my brother and me that he had been born fully formed and bald and set down on Earth in 1952 with a headset and a control panel and a TV monitor ready to get the second half of the 20th century started on schedule. My father was in charge of all the stuff you don't notice until something goes wrong. Because of him, it went right way more than anyone had a right to expect for nearly 50 years.